By saying my name is Maurice Ball, and I serve as the president of the board of the High Speed Rail Alliance. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who might be tuning in for the very first time, the High Speed Rail Alliance aims to be the best source of information about what high speed rail is and its benefits. We also work to support elected officials and other local leaders working to achieve this. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization, and individual members and donors like you provide most of our support. We have a paid staff, but many of us, including our entire board of directors, serve as volunteers. We do this because we want to see much better train service in North America. I myself am a native Texan, having grown up in Houston and San Antonio, where roads and interstates and overpasses are king. Very little passenger train service. But all my life, I've always been an avid train fan. And once I grew up and I got my engineering degree and became a professional, I moved up here to Chicago, and I was looking for a way to show my support for trains in a professional way. The High Speed Rail Alliance is that way for me. And hopefully the High Speed Rail Alliance can be a way for you also to show your support. For now, I'll turn this over to our executive director, Mr. Rick Harnish, and he'll set the stage for today's talk by talking about the national role that Illinois plays. Rick?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maurice. I really appreciate all the work you've done for the organization over I don't know how many years. I think it didn't begin with a trip to Japan, but certainly a trip to ride bullet trains in Japan kind of solidified the important role that you play. And I don't remember when that was. It must have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, the time is amazing. How time flies.
Yeah, time flies, absolutely. So as Maurice said, we're a nonprofit. We are working for stronger communities, for stronger families, for a healthier environment by advocating for high-speed trains, for regional trains, night trains, essentially ways to get people to move around the country without a car. And, you know, this, in my mind, this has become more and more urgent as our country changes, as our economy changes over the last several months. I've become more determined that we need to figure out ways to get people onto trains and onto buses as quickly as possible as we go into a period of economic uncertainty that may require people to cut back on spending a lot, which means we need a way for people to get around much more affordably. I think that by putting a lot of focus into Illinois, we can make a huge difference in that regard and change the national conversation. So today is a very brief overview of that, why I think Illinois is important, what we need to do in order to speed up the process, and other ways that we need to move forward. We do have long held a vision of electrified high-speed trains going up the lakefront, and we created a painting to illustrate that vision. And if you would like one of those, you can go to hsrail.org/merch and get one. To be clear, if you hit the merch button, you won't get there. You do need to put this directly into the URL in order to get there. There's no link to it at this point. So I want to go back to how I got motivated to do this. Many years ago, I lived in Lakewood, Ohio, which is a western suburb of Cleveland, and we would take the rapid transit to downtown Cleveland. Cleveland Union Terminal, which most of it is still there, they turned it into a mall, unfortunately, and most of the tracks are gone. But it really is a fantastic railroad station. And it was a real entrance into the city. where you went up these very ornate slanted walkways through a very ornate lobby and into an incredibly vibrant city with full sidewalks, stores along the streets. I used to love going to the Woolworths and sitting at the counter and getting a Coca-Cola, and all of that. I was very upset about the train service declining very rapidly and then starting to remove facilities from the train station, and said, how can this be? Why are we doing this? And shortly after that, Cleveland really went downhill. Now, I know that there are many reasons why our cities declined, but certainly trying to re-equip them to handle cars was a big piece of it. So many of our cities went downhill as we converted our lives to nearly 100% auto-based. And it used to be that I didn't feel that in Chicago. But over the last several years, when I go downtown Chicago, I'm very concerned about the economic health of my city. And this is very personal because I live here and I care so much about it. And we need to figure out how to rebuild our cities for all-day use. We very much focused on bringing people from the suburbs to the city for 9 to 5 work and then getting them out. And that model's just not going to work very well anymore. We need to figure out how to make cities truly vibrant for all-day use. And that means putting retail back on the streets. So as people are walking from the railroad station to wherever they're going along very vibrant retail strips. It means converting buildings to apartment buildings, building new apartment buildings. And it's not just about downtown Chicago. This is about every city in the Midwest. And even those suburbs where currently their downtowns are focused on parking lots for the train to downtown, we need to revive those and make those true cities again. And we've had some progress on that. Arlington Heights is a good example, and others. And one that's very significant is the town of Normal, where they used the coming improvements, which are now there. But when they started their program, they used the work that was underway to improve the Amtrak service to make the trains faster as a catalyst for really restructuring their downtown to be a lot more prosperous, making it possible for people to walk, making it desirable for people to come downtown. And high quality train service was the catalyst for doing that. And so what happens when this happens? Not only are people talking to each other more often because they're bumping into each other on the street, but the city finances are much healthier because you get a lot more real estate tax per acre for dense development than you do for a Walmart with its huge expansive parking lot. So you don't have the cost of providing the car infrastructure and you get a lot more real estate taxes. It's a really good formula for making our cities stronger. So what I think we need to do is focus on creating a railway plan for not only Illinois, for the country, but we can start that process in the Midwest with a heavy focus on Illinois and on Michigan and on Wisconsin. Last week, I did a webinar on some really exciting opportunities in Michigan. But there's a significant reason why Chicago is so important to everybody. And that's because most of the routes that we need to have come to Chicago. And it's very difficult to make this system work without making significant investments in the Chicago area. And that means that my governor and my legislature has a very critical role to play in being a nationwide leader. So this map illustrates the yellow are what the FRA identified as core routes. Except for the line to Omaha, they identified that you needed 2 new electrified tracks. with trains going at least 125 hours on everything but Omaha that's in yellow on this map. Then we've got the blue, light blue, which is what is currently in the corridor ID program. We're not sure what the state of the corridor ID program as our government changes very quickly. We need to fight very hard to get that process accelerated, get more money into the program and get those projects moving. And we need to start that at the state level and pushing the states to keep moving through that process, whether or not there's federal money to do that. So that's the light blue. Purple is links that should be in the discussion and aren't to the degree that we believe that they need to be. And then solid blue is the foundation for existing Amtrak service. Now there should be some radial routes around here. There aren't, but really the key is the Chicago really is the key to making so much work. So this becomes a very important place as we push to create a truly aggressive, truly revolutionary rail program for the country. So we need a plan, a long-term plan that identifies what happens out into the future, and then working backwards in order to understand what pieces need to happen in what order in order to get to that future. So we've made, in my view, a significant strategic error as rail advocates over the years in trying to find short-term wins that can help us keep the discussion going. We do need short-term wins, but frequently those short-term wins are so expensive and take so long that you never get out to the end. So we need to first start with the end in mind and then figure out what we need to do to get there. The FRA's framework for a Midwest network was a good step in that direction. The Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission was working on a grant from the federal government in order to continue that process. That process needs to continue in a very aggressive way. But we need to start with the long-term goal and then work back, well, what do we do in order to get there? The only state that's done this in a truly effective way, in a really big vision way, is the state of California. And they've actually put together a draft timetable for a period out in the future. And I think now they're setting at 2050. This is what they think the timetable should be. Each of those lines is an hourly departure. Red is a high-speed train. If it's next to a line of a different color, it's on electrified tracks that are also shared with regional rail. If the red line is by itself, then it's on dedicated high-speed tracks. But you can see how this whole thing ties together. And they've figured out, and they've included the bus network as well, how you make it possible to travel practically in a practical way from one part of the state to the other without a car and doing it quickly. And the piece that makes this all really work and brings 10 times the ridership and revenue is the high-speed trunk line from San Francisco to LA. So we talked about the Midwest and everything coming into there. I meant to highlight that there's a lot of arrows that go beyond the Midwest to the coasts, but clearly Chicago plays a key role. So let's figure out what to do about getting Illinois to have a comprehensive long-term plan. So if there is a color line, so orange or red or green, yellow, those are lines that are either have had significant EIS work, like the Chicago to Omaha route, or are in the corridor ID program, like the Chicago to Peoria route, Carbondale, St. Louis, Quincy, Hannibal, Madison via Milwaukee, etc. And there are some dashed lines here that I strongly believe are missing pieces to the puzzle. So it's interesting how there's a corridor ID to Peoria and a corridor ID to Quad Cities on a different route. And there's this little piece missing here that if you include it, makes everything work much better. How we don't have official planning underway to get to Galena, one of our most important tourist destinations, I'm not sure. And then the opportunity that I am currently the most frustrated with is there's a line between Chicago and Madison that has almost no freight trains. It's almost entirely one owner. It's only 124 miles. It's much shorter than the highway route. So you can get somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours between Chicago and Madison and do it every hour. And in terms of typical projects like this, you could do it fairly easily. So we need to get people thinking about that more. So this is what I would like to see the state of Illinois put together in a long-term integrated network model that thinks about how you go from Carbondale to Peoria, perhaps with a change between a train and a bus at Champaign, or from Galesburg to Springfield with taking a bus and then a train. Once you add up all of these different little pieces together and connecting different pieces, the whole thing becomes much more powerful together. And that's what California proved with their integrated network plan. Because we can't take on the entire thing, in our network plan, we could have some sort of placeholder here that funnels in traffic from the east. Again, a funnel here, a funnel from Madison in, right? But we need to have the state of Illinois undertake a true integrated network plan. We're hoping to get that process started through the Illinois High-Speed Railway Commission. Right now, the commission, and I'm a commissioner, by the way, is focused on the trunk line, which we'll talk about in a minute. So step one is it starts with having an integrated plan which connects the entire state and demonstrates that this does provide benefits to the entire state. I talked about the trunk is the high-speed line. And, we should be looking at Chicago to New York with a branch to Detroit, and Chicago to Detroit to Toronto, and Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Chicago, Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, Atlanta, etc. But we are one state. So the commission is starting with the Chicago to St. Louis corridor. Quandale Consultants is doing the work for the commission. And at this point, they have identified some reasonable routes for high-speed rail. And then they're in the process of doing some analysis to understand which 2 or 3 options should move forward in discussion. And I'm looking forward to, fingers crossed, a good initial report in January to talk about ways that we can make this happen. Then we need to discuss as a state how you actually govern this. Is it a new authority? Is it a department in the Department of Transportation? Is it an extension of Metra? What is it? So that's a really exciting to me game changer in the conversation, because it's the first time that there's been true public a public study of a true high-speed line that really had public engagement in the Midwest, despite the fact that we've known it would work well in the Midwest for a long time. So I'm really excited about this progress, and we need to keep it moving forward. Another thing that's kind of different than what most people think, we need to think about where we can find rights of way for electrified trains without cutting new paths through the city. And essentially the potential for that is these green lines, the Union Pacific line to Milwaukee, Union Pacific line to Madison, perhaps the line to Joliet, which is owned by Metra, and then the line to University Park, which is owned by Metra, or there's a strong case to be made that the right-of-way is wide enough you could have the Metra tracks, high-speed tracks, and CN freight tracks all on the same right of way. And then you've got the South Shore, which is electrified to the east. And we've got a missing link in this, which is to O'Hare. But we've looked at ways that we think it's possible to create a dedicated pair of electrified tracks between Union Station and O'Hare up to the connection with Madison. So not on anybody's radar at the high level yet, but we're working hard to get it there because there's just so much opportunity to make a real difference in the way trains work for the Midwest if we can get this electrified route into the city. Another asset we have is 4 terminal stations. So, we did a webinar and a video about what we believe needs to happen with Union Station to expand it. One of the things that needs to happen is to make Ogilvie essentially a part of Union Station. If we could figure out how to do that with LaSalle Street, we'd be doing very well. LaSalle Street has the advantage of, in the short term, trains from Rock Island and Moline could go directly into LaSalle Street Station. And you could get those trains running without figuring out how to do the expensive connection to Union Station. Same thing with trains to Carbondale and Champaign could go into Millennium if we could get the easier parts downstate done. So it's hard in a lot of ways to think about the state actually doing this when Metra is still running coaches that were built in the mid-50s. And I took this, I think just a few weeks ago, maybe it was a few months ago, in Ogilvie Station. I haven't looked at the number to see exactly what date it was, but if I had to bet, I'd say it was 1956 that this coach was built. So on the one hand, we're talking about a very visionary, very aggressive program to build railways so that we can strengthen all of our downstate communities, strengthen the city, get our finances for the state in better order. But we need to make significant investments in it. And we haven't truly kept up with keeping a modern fleet going. So that is something we recognize as a real issue that needs to be overcome. So what we did was we are supporting some champions in Springfield on a companion bill in the Senate and the House that would create a state railway program. This is part of a longer term discussion about capital, so we don't expect it necessarily to pass this year, but it lays out the structure and the general spending that's needed for a true railway program. And it has categories of expenses that we need to think about how we're actually going to fund those and manage them moving forward. So in big groups, they're bridges. Metra has identified that they need $280 million a year in order to bring their bridges up to what they need to be as quickly as possible. In the left-hand corner there, you've got the Amtrak-owned 21st Street Bridge over the river, which can't necessarily be replaced because it's a landmark, but we do need at least a bridge next to it for passenger trains. In the middle there, you've got a fantastic example. One of the assets we have in this state is that the Union Pacific and IDOT know how to work together to build high quality passenger tracks with highly safe grade crossings and protections for the communities. So this is the Chicago to St. Louis corridor. I forgot where I took it, but it's somewhere north of Dwight. So a big thing for building track, putting second mains back in, sometimes putting third mains in, making grade crossings safer. And of course, the safest grade crossing is a bridge. So we should be building using highway funds to build a lot of bridges over tracks and making sure that any highway project that comes near a railroad is prepared for the expansion that needs to be there, which is one of the reasons we need a long-term master plan that I talked about earlier. Need a lot more trains. We don't have enough trains today. Need to replace the metro trains. We don't have enough for the downstate service. Need to be investing right now in new rolling stock, a lot of new stations. We talked about Union Station, Ogilvie and LaSalle, et cetera. And then we talked about electrification. And then a segment for beefing up the Bureau of Railways in order to actually manage all this work. So very excited about this bill being introduced this year and moving that forward. The next bill is, if you look at some of the less than successful railway projects that, for example, Chicago to Moline, which has not moved forward as quickly as we would like. A key part of the problem in the California high-speed rail, a key part of the problem was they weren't truly ready with true engineering work in order to get moving quickly on making it happen. And once they got out into the field, especially in the Chicago to Moline project, they realized they had way underthought how much it was going to cost to do. So with Moline, maybe they would have said, you know what, this isn't an easy project. Let's make it more expensive and run a train every 2 hours so it's truly useful to people. And if we had done the engineering work up front, maybe that decision would have been made up front and the project could have moved forward more quickly because we truly knew what we were getting into. So the next pair of bills is a short-term bill that we hope actually does pass this year, which would appropriate funds to the Bureau of Railroads to actually begin serious engineering for 9 corridors. And those 9 corridors are listed in the bill, essentially Chicago to Milwaukee, Chicago to Madison, Rockford, Galena, Dubuque, Moline, Quincy, Peoria, St. Louis, Carbondale, and the high-speed rail project. So again, very excited about this. And then the next pair of bills that we've introduced would direct the Illinois Department of Transportation to create an intercity bus program within the Railroad Bureau. So right now, Illinois does pass through federal funds to operate 2 daily round trips by bus between Chicago and Moline. It's not nearly enough. It should be a bus every 2 hours. And kind of an odd route that goes Chicago, Rockford, Rochelle, Oglesby, Normal, Champaign, and Danville. 1 round trip on that route a day. That's through the transit program, but let's make the intercity bus program part of the Railway Bureau. And the reason we would do that is the best example of this is the San Joaquin corridor, which uses buses to feed a lot of passengers into their route and also uses buses to fill in where you can't have the frequencies you need. And it's all on the same ticket, all coordinated, and it's done. That's managed in their case by the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority. And then there's a few buses that the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority manages. And they manage that for Caltrans, the Department of Transportation. And so we need to emulate that and get this stood up fast. And boy, I wish we had these buses already. An example that I have coming up next week is I need to go to Springfield, and you have your choice in Springfield between going from Springfield to Chicago in the morning or at the end of the day. I need to go from Springfield to Chicago in the middle of the day. Don't want to drive. So the other thing is we have been pressuring the city to buy the existing station because you can't run these buses without a place for them to go. And unfortunately, due to, again, We need a master plan that looks at the future, because there was no master plan about how buses and trains would connect. Every opportunity to have buses at Union Station is now gone. So the closest we can do is the existing Greyhound station. The state needs to buy that and run it like an airport. The state or the city needs to buy it and run it like an airport. And you know, we significantly subsidize airports all around the state and make it available to multiple carriers. That's what we need to do here. And we actually don't need to significantly subsidize this, because bus stations are not as expensive as airports to run. So it probably can more than cover its operating costs. So we're really excited about this bill too. And I'm really hoping that the legislature decides to actually move this forward. So we're in the process of continuing to ramp this up and get the message out. We've been on kind of the same theme for a while now, which is both frustrating and encouraging, because we are making progress by continuing to focus. We're making progress. We're getting there. We got the commission started. We've had the discussion about the railway program, but right now they're trying to figure out what they're going to do about keeping Metro operating. We need to, and that's called the transit fiscal cliff. We need to move beyond just thinking about what we do to keep the transit agencies operating, to moving to how do we grow these very quickly? How do we get ridership doubled? And you need significant investments in that, which is one of the reasons we've got the investment bill in the House. But this is not quite ready for prime time. We're giving you a sneak peek, but we do have what's going to become, or what is and will become better over a short period of time, an action center where you can keep track of the bills and what's happening with those bills. We would also like to, if there's an expert that would like us to provide some short descriptions of what's happening with the transit funding debate and the governance debate, would love to be able to report on those here. We have a petition that you can sign and that you can have others sign. We have, the last time we really worked on this was during the Capitol bill discussion in 2019. And out of that discussion, there was money put in for service to Rockford, which hopefully will be operating fairly shortly. We talked about Moline. There was money for Moline. There was also a little bit of money for improving the Champaign-Carbondale route that we need to get some more oomph behind that and get that moving. But we have still posted endorsements that we got for this concept back in 2019. And one thing that you can do is if you live in one of these municipalities, you can approach the leader of that, either the mayor, the president of the county, etc., to say, will you refresh this and get it officially refreshed for current? If you want a sample letter, we've got a sample letter that you can download there. The petition, again, as we talked about. And we will update this as the project goes. This page may look very different to you if you look at it in the next couple of days. But right now we've described what the program should look like, why the network plan is so important. And then as time goes, we have ideas about specific parts of what Illinois should be investing in as we move forward. And as you know, one of the keys to this is Union Station, and we got to figure out how to get trains to O'Hare in a reasonable way. What seems like a small project, but isn't, and is very critical, is the A2 flyover and others like that. And then we've got kind of a inventory of what should big projects in Chicago. So this will be a growing resource center for how to get engaged and understand what's happening as we continue to move forward with this critical work of getting the middle of the country started in investing heavily in railways, not just for passengers, but for freight as well, because we've got a lot of trucks on the road that if we had better railway infrastructure, probably could be by train and should be by train. So we need a true railway program that invests in railway infrastructure across the state. And Illinois is a key driver of making that work nationwide. So thank you all again, those who are members. Thank you for being a member. For those who aren't, you'll see here, there's a button that says become a member. And if you like a poster, it's merch. So thank you again, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Rick, and thanks everyone. A couple of quick things before we get to the questions. We've tried this for those who are tuning in for the first time today. We usually do these at noon Central, and we tried 4 o'clock just to see if a different time works for people. I'm going to try for the very first time, at least for me, doing a poll in Zoom to see what time works best for people. So if this works, feel free to tell us whether you prefer that noon Central slot or this 4 o'clock slot. I just hit launch on the poll, so you should hopefully be seeing that. We also had a question about the recording. You should have gotten a notification that this is being recorded. All of our talks like this are recorded, and it takes us a couple of days sometimes, but we make them all available. There's a collection of, probably getting close to 100 of these now. And if you can find them all, if you go to hsrail.org/events, and then on there's a tab called Archived Events. So you can browse the whole library whenever you'd like. But let's get to the questions. Ashley asked, yes.
I'm sorry, I want to point out, an audience member did correct me, and I should know this. Railway bridges are interstate commerce. And so the city cannot say that cannot prevent anybody from replacing that bridge. So thank you for reminding me of something that I should know. So now the next question.
Okay. This question came in early on when you were talking about the FRA pillar corridors. Ashley asked, could you say more about those? What are they? Could you say more about those pillar corridors and their importance?
So the FRA was directed in 2008 to create a national railway plan. They chose to start doing it on a region by region basis. And so they were trying to drive the discussion about having a network plan as opposed to individual route plans. So they created, first as a test, they created the Southwest Regional Plan, which was the first to kind of test case. And then concurrently during the Obama administration, they did essentially a plan centered on Chicago and another plan centered on Atlanta. Not quite, but to simplify the discussion, that's what they did. And then they, sorry, I should probably just talk instead of trying to show, but it's kind of important. So I found it while trying to talk. So this was the first plan that they did, and they had different levels of service. So in this case, high-speed rail purple, green was either high-speed or regional, red was regional, and then yellow was shared use. What they never made clear in any of these studies was that regional was 125 miles an hour or more, with electrified tracks. So kind of a nomenclature problem, but essentially, so anything that's green, purple, or red, they suggested based on their study that that should be electrified high-speed trains. Then these states worked together with the FRA to create a framework. And this was the framework that they did there. And then these states in purple worked together on a framework. And this was the framework that they got there. And the interesting thing to me is these two connect at Nashville. And you can see it's green or purple the entire way, or red all the way from St. Paul to Miami. By the way, Chicago to Miami is Beijing to Hong Kong. You can do that by high-speed train today in about 7 or 8 hours. But, you know, I wonder if they had continued and done the Northeast plan instead of just focusing on the Northeast corridor. You know, you probably would have had a connection like that at Pittsburgh and at Buffalo. And if they had done if they had done a thing around Dallas, it probably would have connected at Memphis and Kansas City, and similarly up here. So these are the pillar corridors that the FRA has identified.
Thank you. Audrey asked, how did you come up with the costs for the statewide railway program legislation?
Frankly, I eyeballed it to start the discussion. But we need to have that discussion. And part of coming up with more legitimate costs is that network plan. But our goal at this point is to start people thinking in the proper range. And then the DOT needs to actually do the engineering work in order to figure it out. So one of the things we need to do is get engineering work underway, which is the middling building.
Thanks. We have a few questions about Chicago to St. Louis. Ray asks, do you see any way to adapt the existing Chicago to St. Louis corridor for high speed?
No. So it could be a lot better than it is. But the challenge that we have in the Midwest, you think, oh, it's really flat here, so it should be easy. But the challenge is that there's a railroad station a half a day away from each farm. That works out to about every 5 miles. And so there are little towns around each railway station about every 5 miles. And that makes it very difficult to create a sealed, very, very difficult to create a sealed corridor. Plus the existing route now has heavy freight trains on it, which are not compatible with high-speed trains.
Okay. And then Ray had another question. How would a high-speed Chicago to St. Louis line integrate with the Springfield Rail Improvement Project, which is supposed to be completed in 2027?
So that's one of the things that needs to be answered. We don't know that. There are ideas on how you do it. I have a strong opinion, but that's one of the things that we need to research in the Illinois High-Speed Railway Commission.
Okay. And then Mark had a related comment on a question saying the US and Illinois have put about $1.5 billion or more into upgrading the St. Louis to Chicago Lincoln corridor to 110 miles an hour over a period of years. That was styled as high-speed rail to the public using a portion of President Obama's high-speed rail funding. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by going to the public seeking more funds for this corridor and making what was invested in that seem redundant? Would it be better to advocate for a corridor that currently doesn't have quality service, like Chicago to Fort Wayne to Detroit, or to Cleveland, or some other project like that?
So one of the exciting opportunities in the Midwest is Chicago, Fort Wayne, Toledo, Detroit, Cleveland. And certainly folks in Indiana should be pushing hard on the legislature to fund the engineering work for that. It's an exciting opportunity. It needs to move forward. There was another really good one in that list. Fort Wayne, Chicago to Indianapolis. why nobody's designing a true high-speed line between Chicago and Indianapolis. It's only 190 miles with two very vibrant cities. So yes, there are other opportunities, and if you live in Indiana, please get very engaged in pushing in those. But we need Illinois to push its piece of the network, and the money was well spent. I am thrilled that that work was done. That should be the standard for passenger rail routes across the country. Um, all of those crossings are much safer. The trains are actually reliable in the middle. It used to be when it rained, the signaling system would go out. And I remember sitting going 10 miles an hour because the signaling system was out. Money well spent, but we need to build high-speed rail as well.
Okay. Tom says Chicago is a bottleneck. Do any of the FRA corridors avoid it? For example, going from St. Louis east through Columbus, as the National Limited used to go.
So there should be radial routes like Chicago, Indianapolis, Columbus. There aren't any really serious proposals at this time. It is a line on the long distance map, proposed long distance network map. But we really should have more of a grid as opposed to a hub and spoke in the region. And again, that's about getting states serious about having railway programs.
Have the consultants looked at the option of using Chicago Northwestern's abandoned right-of-way to exit Springfield southbound? On the map, it looked like they wanted to try and either avoid Springfield or maintain using the UP right-of-way that Amtrak uses, which
So I know that they're being really thorough, but I don't know specifics.
Paul asks, how can the CN be incentivized to cooperate with extending service from Rockford to Galena and Dubuque? He says, many of us are thinking about the more cooperative BNSF up from Savannah and connecting eastward to Chicago through other deserving cities.
You know, I strongly believe that the current structure for Amtrak service is fatally flawed. Yes, you can pass a law that says you have to provide a service at marginal costs, and then you can fight over what the marginal cost is. But your vendor's not going to be super thrilled with helping you out if you're paying a fraction of what their normal customers pay and you demand much better service than all of their other customers. So we really need a new framework on how we work cooperatively with railroads in order to make it a worthwhile endeavor. We did a blog series on the Capital Corridor project where Gene Skoropowski figured that out with the Union Pacific between San Jose and Sacramento. Gene was very instrumental in putting together the deal between Brightline, Florida and the Florida East Coast Railroad. There's another example. So Metra has strong relationships with its railroads. So there are examples of making it work, but you need to have a serious railway program to do it. You can't do it if you're only spending tens of millions a year on the service. So it's really about getting the states to get serious about having true railway programs where they're trying to figure out how to solve these problems.
Okay. This next question, we're talking mainly about Illinois, so I don't know if this is the place for it, but it's an interesting question. So here we go. Yassine asks, how can we create more trans-border links like Chicago to Toronto or to Montreal, especially with Canada's new plans to build high-speed rail?
There should be high-speed rail that goes Chicago to Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, Quebec. I'm so happy that the Canadian government decided to go with high-speed rail on the Toronto to Montreal, Quebec corridor. That's really great. Part of it, the first step is to get high-speed rail from Chicago to Detroit, get the Canadians to do high-speed rail from Toronto to Windsor, and then figure out an agreement for how you get under or over the river. But again, we need to focus on getting the states to be serious about trains. And in this case, that's Michigan needs to get serious about investing in trains.
We have a couple of questions about the bus station discussion. One is, and how that would all work. One is, what is the model for operating the intercity bus program? Would it be similar to Greyhound or Amtrak Thruways? Do you know how much of a subsidy it might require per year?
So we don't know. Again, we don't have the kind of planning work in place that's needed. So one of the first steps that needs to happen is IDOT needs to create the department for it and put somebody in charge of doing the initial planning work. But, and again, if there's an expert in how public bus networks are structured, we would love to do some more work on this. But it could be like in California, where the JPAs contract with private bus companies, and they manage it through the Amtrak Thruway program. It could be like Colorado's busting program, where they're actually contracting to operate intercity buses. And I'm pretty sure that's the deal. That's one I would really love to have somebody do a research on, is how that is working. So there are ways to do it. We don't know what the best way is.
Okay. And then another bus related question. Would you need either a pedestrian walkway or shuttle to make transferring from Union Station to buses at the Greyhound station feasible?
We do need to figure out some practical way to connect those. You know, but I've I've asked several times of folks at the city. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out the right person to ask. But why don't you draw a blue line on the paint from the middle of Union Station out the southwest exit, down the street to the blue line L, and then continue that blue line down to the Greyhound station, so that at least people can find their way. Covered sidewalks are kind of ugly, but maybe we should do a covered sidewalk. There's probably other ways. Not sure what the answer is, but we need to find it.
Here is, going back to what you shared about the Illinois High-Speed Rail Commission. Someone reports that they keep trying to attend those meetings, but when they email the link on the page to get the Zoom link there, they never get a response, I guess, from IDOT. Do you have any advice about getting to and for those?
If you can send me your information, and my email is Rick, R-I-C-K, at hsrail.org. I'll forward that on. And then just so everybody's clear, the next meeting is Monday. Trying to make sure my memory is correct. Monday at 10:30?
Great.
Monday at 10:30.
Thanks.
Downtown Chicago.
Let's see. How feasible would creating a high-speed rail line to Peoria be? And could we then connect Peoria to cities like Bloomington, Normal, and Champaign with passenger rail?
So going through Peoria is one of the options that the commission is looking at. So, anything is feasible with enough money, but certainly, without question, Peoria should be on the rail map. And there should be a radial link that goes around from Moline, Galesburg, Peoria, Normal, Champaign to Indianapolis. Unfortunately, there was never a railroad that did that in one piece. So it would be really challenging. It's doable, but probably not the top priority to do rail there, which is why we're focused on that would be one of the places buses need to start running very frequently.
Okay. We'll have to wrap up soon, but let's do a couple more since we got a late start. I'm not sure if this question is asked professionally or in general, but Craig, who is a land surveyor, asks, how can we help?
So the easiest way is to sign that petition. If you sign the petition, there will be other ways that you can help. If you can go meet with your legislator and tell them why trains are important to you and why you think we finally start truly taking this serious. That's a fantastic help. And you can become a member of the Alliance.
And let's end with a pair of political questions. Mark asks, do you think the excitement of the Biden administration's investment in high-speed rail will be halted by Elon Musk, who's advocating the privatization of Amtrak? And then another question, is the Trump administration going to impact our ability to move forward with ideas and plans like you've shared today?
I don't know. So,
Fair enough.
I think everybody is aware that things are changing very quickly. One thing that's obvious is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So, I was reading on my way here, there was a signing ceremony set up to start the process of dismantling the Department of Education. Lots of complaining happened. That press conference didn't happen. So therein lies the lesson. If you want great trains, you need to push hard to make this happen. And using too big of a word that I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but I tried to get a definition out of GTP, and it came back, this is a meaningless tautology. But change happens when it happens, right? So if you have something that you want to have changed about the government, about whatever, the time that change is most likely to happen is when something else is changing. And right now, things are changing fast. So we need to push hard on the state capitals to be serious about funding true railway infrastructure and getting buses running as fast as possible, because in my view, we're not going to be able to afford to drive. It's highly likely. And whatever the case, we need to have healthier cities, stronger families, stronger communities, and railways make that easier and more enjoyable. So right now is the time to push hard on really making this happen and making sure the states know that of the many things that they're fighting for change in, that the railway program is part of what they're fighting for. So thank you again, everybody, for being a member. Thank you, Maurice, for your leadership, and Chris for everything you do, and all the other members. For our volunteer committee has been very helpful over the last year. So we've got a lot ahead of us, but the more we can get people together more often, face to face, the better off we'll be in many respects. So thank you again for joining us today.
We'll be squeaky wheels together.
Squeaky wheels, yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.